Everyone, in this tutorial we're going to have a look at doing some color correction on some images. I've got two images of some Volkswagen Beetles and also a little red circle. So there are a few things that we can look at as far as changing color in assets that we're bringing in, so we can try and integrate them into our matte painting, and hopefully this is going to answer some of those questions. Now what I'm actually going to do really quickly is I'm going to try and do a rough and ready deep etch of these images. So there's one Volkswagen, there's the other, and I'm going to use Photoshop's new object selection tool, and I'm just going to select on my yellow Volkswagen here, and I'm just going to drag a big rectangle over it and see what Photoshop does. It's missing a few areas, but this is just a quick down and dirty deep etch. I can go back and fix that later, and all I'm going to do is hit the mask key for that. Let's jump into the one here, and I'm going to do the same thing and see how Photoshop handles that. And it's again not perfect, but for now let's go ahead and change that. So we've got two Volkswagens. What I'm going to try and do is see how I can go around switching out the main aspect colors of both of these and see if I can get them to match a little bit better. So what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to convert this yellow one into a smart object. So I'm going to right click in the layer panel here and go convert to smart object. Please note that the mask disappears. It's not gone completely. If I double click onto the smart object, there it is. I can re-edit it right there, but I'm not really interested in that point, so let's jump out of there. So there it is, and what I can do now is I'm going to go and start doing some color corrections to this manually. The reason why I convert it to a smart object, it's not essential for doing a color correction. It's the only reason I'm doing it is so that I can show you how to readjust. So if you're doing it this way, wrong layer, where you go image adjust and you've got all your adjustment options, if it's on a smart object you can go through and re-edit them. If it's on a raster layer like this one here, it will be permanent. So you just need to make that decision, but it depends on what you need to do. So smart object, for example, you can't directly erase, but you can use a mask. So let's try that. I'm going to select this layer, I'm going to go image adjust, and typically there are three of these that I recommend as a quick sort of adjustments to usually do. The first one is levels, and this is usually just to adjust the light and dark variations. So if I push this around, you can sort of see how I can bring in the dark areas and light areas, and what I'm trying to do is just get it a little bit closer to how I think the lighting is in this previous one on the right. Now you can also adjust the colors here, but I'm going to jump instead, going image adjust, and I'm going to go to color balance. Now I already know that this is predominantly yellow, and if I start pushing up the blues and the cyans, and also then jump into the shadows and start pushing those up, you can see it's not really quite going to be able to get there. As I start pushing these around, it's already kind of well over the top because of the yellowness of this Volkswagen. So to try and get it to that monochromatic sort of thing, it's really not going to work jumping straight into the color balance. So I'm going to cancel that. Instead, what I'm going to do is go image adjust. I'm going to go hue and saturation. I'm just going to lower that saturation down. So now it's getting, already getting a little bit closer to the saturation of the other one. And I can push the hue around there. Now, one of the downsides of doing this as well is unless you specifically have an area selected, it's going to affect the entire image. But I'm going to step out of that. I've already dropped the saturation down. Let's go image adjust, and let's go color balance once more, and let's see if I can push this a little bit closer. And it's getting there. In a pinch that might work, and then you jump back. So you can already see I've got color, hue, saturation, and levels, and I can change these. I can double click on that. It's going to say we won't be able to see the previous stuff, but I already know it just needs to be a little bit brighter, and already it's kind of getting there. So color balance, hue, saturation, and levels, if you push those around, you can get a relatively close option for your object. So I'm actually going to get rid of those smart filters. I'm going to go right click clear filters, And I just want to show you that you can do this with just a selection area. So as a selected area, I'm going to go image, adjust, and let's just go straight into hue and saturation, and you can see that's going to adjust just that selected area. So if it is down to the case of just using, you just want to change this yellow, you might want to just select the yellow area. You could potentially try using a wand tool for this, or a quick selection tool. It can be a little bit tricky, and then jump in and go image, adjust, and start playing around with the levels, hue, saturation, and that's going to do all that. So that is one technique, and that's usually one I recommend for really quick color change for things, particularly if they're relatively close. These aren't quite that. Let's look at a couple of other options. So image, adjust. Now there are some down the bottom here that you'll notice it's not going to allow us to use. So desaturate, image, adjust, color match, replace color, equalize. Unfortunately for these to work, it needs to be a raster layer, which is unfortunate because they actually work quite well. So I'm going to say don't bother about the good deep etching for this. I'm just going to rasterize this so we can have a look. So right click, rasterize layer, and let's see if we can hit some of these. So image, adjust, replace color. This is going to come up in its own window, and I'm going to get the color eyedropper there, and I'm going to click on the yellow component there, and I'm going to ramp up the fuzziness so you can kind of see what's going on here. And just to make sure, I'm going to change the hue, and you can actually see it starts changing the color out right there as we ramp out the fuzziness. Hopefully it'll start doing it without influencing too much else. And then you can change the hue and the saturation and also the lightness, so you can make it lighter or darker. So you might be able to push that around, and if it's a nice block color, you might be able to get that to blend out. But if it seeps out all over the place, you notice the stickers here are also changing as we sort of go through that. So there's that option as well. So that is image, adjust, and replace color. Usually good for big blocks of color. The other one that's really kind of interesting is match color. So let's click on that. This one is potentially a little bit, I don't want to say tricky, but you just need to be aware of what you're doing in this. And what you need to do is you need to go down to the bottom, you need to go to source. Now source is the document. So you can see I've actually got a few documents open here. The one we are actually in is Volkswagen 3.jpg. So I'm going to select that. There it is there. So that's our document. And then I'm going to go layer VW12, which is what we're in currently. And I'm going to go, you know what, I want it to match Volkswagen 1, which is this one here. So what it's looking at is looking at that image, and it's going, okay, well these are the kind of the colors. Let's throw them over to this. We're going to try and match up the colors. Now it's not perfect. It's kind of given us a browny orange color, but it's got a little bit of green there. And from there you can play around with the color intensity and the luminance and stuff like that, and also the fade with it as well. And so you might be able to get something that's pretty damn close to it. It definitely does sort of integrate things a lot easier. Now, just to mess this up a little bit further, I'm actually going to switch this over to the sphere. So there we are. Wrong one. Image Volkswagen 3.jpg. Great. Layer sphere. It's the red sphere here. And as you can see, that now applies that to the overall image. So it kind of acts as a blend mode, but it could be worthwhile checking out. It might be a really quick preset that you can have ready and waiting to go. So the next technique I'm going to show you is a really powerful one, and this is one you could potentially use after you've mashed or bashed your images together. And it's using clipping masks. Now the way that clipping masks work is the layer that you want to adjust the color and also lightness and darkness, you create a new layer above that. And there it is there, layer 1, empty layer. And I'm going to right click on that and go to create clipping mask. You'll notice it changes, got a little arrow here, and what that's basically doing is saying whatever I paint in here, so I'm going to switch to a brush straight away. Let's pick a bright red color, and whatever I paint in this is only going to paint over the layer that is directly below that it's linked to. So that little arrow is pointing to our little yellow Volkswagen, and there it is there. Now I'm actually painting outside of this, so but it's only going to allow me to see that marking where that Volkswagen is. Now interestingly enough, if I do go back to my Volkswagen and I decide that I'm going to paint extra things on it, so I'm just going to select white for this, and I start painting over here, you can see it is now going to reveal that clipping mask below there as well. But for this point, that clipping mask is going to be extremely useful for me to be able to paint in things like color and also shadows and highlights. So let's have a quick look at that. So the clipping mask is already going to tie in to that, and what I might do is I'm also going to use this quick selection tool. Let's zoom in a bit. W, quick selection tool, and let's just stretch that out a little bit. And then I might just subtract some of the other areas that I don't want for this. Unfortunately, it's not going to be perfect, but you know, we do what we can with the time that we have. So of that, even though I do have a clipping mask on there, I am also specifically just trying to select this yellow region here. And now what I'm going to do is going to go B for brush, and I'm going to hold down Alt to pick up a color, and the color I'm getting from this old one here, and then I'm just going to paint. Let's get my opacities up. Okay, good. And I'm just going to paint over like so. Now that doesn't look fantastic. I'm going to deselect so we can see what's going on there. That doesn't look great. In fact, it looks pretty horrible because it's just, you know, it's lost all its detail. But this is what we're going to do next, is we're going to go to our blend modes, and we're going to start going through these. Now these are all going to have different credentials thrown at them depending on the background color, which is bright yellow, so it's going to be a bit of a challenge, and whether or not it's going to burn it in and or lighten. So as you cycle through these, they're all going to have different effects. Now the one I'm actually looking for is right down the bottom, it's color, and as I get to that one, you can see there it is. It's actually tried to match up the color that I've painted on there. Now the color does not affect the values, doesn't affect the light and darkness of the layer below. It just adds a color to it, and you could potentially just keep painting in aspects to this accordingly. And it's, you know, and as we can see, that's a very effective way to add color to your layer and matching it up from one to the other. So really exciting that way, and blend modes work really well for that. In saying that, also be aware that sometimes multiply does a really good job if it's a fairly, you know, non-bright color like yellow, but in this case it's not. But otherwise, multiply, sometimes color burn, and sometimes overlay and soft light work quite well, but in this case not so much, and color will. While we're here, let's also look at adding some shadows and highlights. So one of the things with this Volkswagen on the right, we've got a bit of shadow coming up on this side. On this one, it's still quite bright on the right side. So new layer, right click, create clipping mask. This one I'm going to use specifically for shadows, and it's very easy to just select black for shadows. What I'm actually going to do is try and pick a dark green color that's equivalent to my image here on the right, and this is clipping mask is attached down to this Volkswagen. Painting in where I think the shadows are. So I'm just going to make sure I've got the right color. Yep, there it is. And you can see it's already a darker shade. Great. And it doesn't look fantastic, unfortunately. Now I'm using a soft round pressure opacity brush with a Wacom, so I've got a little bit of control. But what we're going to do is we're going to switch this from normal, and I'm going to switch this out to multiply. Try color burn as well. Sometimes you can get some stuff there, but usually I find multiply to be the most useful one for that, and we can manually start painting that in. If you don't like what you've done so far, you've got an option of creating a mask for that, or you could simply just go E for erase. Again, get yourself a soft round brush and maybe even drop the opacity so it's a nice gradual fade in, and then you could gradually start etching your way in and out of your layer and start painting it up as required. Now you can do this multiple times. You can create another clipping mask, do the same thing, create clipping mask, brush, and maybe even grab the color that you've got and make it even darker. And I haven't created a clipping mask yet. There we go. And then you could add even further shadows to this, and once again switch that to multiply. These ones are really way too dark, but that's kind of cool because I'm just going to go to opacity and just push that around until I get something that's going to work. And pretty quickly you can see how that's going to be working kind of well. We're going to go from bright to shadow and then further shadow. Likewise, new layout. Let's do a further clipping mask. We're really hitting the clipping masks now. That is not a clipping mask. Right click, create clipping mask. Awesome. And let's add some highlight to this. I'm going to again brush, hold down Alt to get the color that I want. If you want, you can even jump in the color and make it a little bit brighter, but I'm happy with this with a little bit of the color there, and I'm just going to just drop in a little bit of this already, then change my blend mode. And typically what you want to look is from lighten downwards, so lighten, screen, sometimes it's quite good, color dodge, and as you hover through these, and usually overlay and soft light are quite good as well. So let's have a quick look at this. Sometimes it's all about the subtlety. Let's try overlay, and each image is going to be different depending on its colors and stuff like that. So you can see I can sort of paint in elements where I want highlights and shadows, and to lighten areas as required, so I can have whatever effects I want as I go through there, and you can paint that in. And likewise, if you want to add further colors or anything else, clipping masks work really well for this kind of thing. And as you can see, we started off with just, there's our yellow Volkswagen, and then we go, all right, well, let's see if we can match the colors up. Let's see if we can add some shadows. Let's see if we can add some highlights, and we're getting a little bit closer to it. Once again, I'm doing this very, very quickly. I'm not taking that much care in it at all. I have mentioned adding masks to this just to really show you guys quickly. I'll go with this color one here. I'm just going to hit the mask button, and now we've got a mask attached here. And remember, masks simply work. Black is invisible, white is not, and then we could potentially jump into this, and I can go, I'm going to start bringing back some of the yellow in this, and that's going to bring back the yellow as I paint it in from my previous color. And likewise with the other ones, I can bring everything back, and it's non-destructive. If you're happy with it and you go, that's fantastic, that works really well for me, and you want to compress that down, don't forget you can select all of those together and right click and go to merge layers, and that will compress it down into a single raster layer, which is destructive. If you want to have access to re-changing these at any point, you've got a couple of options. You could put it into a folder and rename the folder, or the other option is to grab all of these and right click and convert to a smart object. There's our smart object. It's a single layer, but if you double click in the window there, it will reopen it in its own layer, and then you've got access and can re-edit in there. But unfortunately it's not going to be in situ unless you sort of separate off your window. So, and then once you've saved it, it's kind of like it'll save back and forwards to your object. So there we have it. There's the basics. Image, adjust, levels, hue saturation, and color balance. Usually a quick, easy one. The other ones as well to try and think of is if it's a raster layer, image, adjust, replace color, and match color. And then above that, once again, clipping masks, and then manually paint in and change the blend modes. Alright, we'll catch you next time.